Part 1. Hook. 15 seconds. For centuries, the Galactic Council had known only peace. Their advanced civilizations, bound by treaties and shared prosperity, had long forgotten the horrors of war. They built gleaming cities and explored distant stars, confident in their technological superiority and diplomatic prowess. They believed they were the pinnacle of galactic evolution. Then came the Cathar, a species born of a dying star, ruthless and parasitic. They swept through the outer systems like a plague, demanding tribute and obedience. The Council, unprepared for such barbarity, found themselves terrorized, their fleets scattered, their worlds trembling. They had no answer for the Cathar's relentless aggression. They had no warriors. They had only forgotten a species they had deemed too dangerous to awaken. They had forgotten humanity. The Council chamber on Xylos Prime was a testament to galactic harmony. Or at least it had been. Once, its vast, crystalline dome had shimmered with the gentle light of 1,000 species engaged in peaceful debate. Now the atmosphere was thick with a palpable dread. The holographic projection of Ambassador Virtuk, a being of luminous energy, flickered with barely suppressed fear. They demand another 70% of our planetary energy output, and all unrefined uranium from the Xylos mining colonies, Virtuk's voice resonated, tinged with despair. Failure to comply, they warn, will result in the immediate orbital bombardment of our capital city. Across the table, Councillor Kalor, a massive stone-skinned being from the mountainous world of Grakthar, slammed one of his 4 fists onto the polished durasteel. Extortion! This is a violation of every intergalactic treaty. We cannot continue to capitulate to these terrorists! The Cathar! They had burst into the galactic scene barely 2 cycles ago, emanating from the desolate, radiation-scarred fringes of the Orion Arm. Their ships were crude, but terrifyingly effective. Their weapons brutal and their philosophy chillingly simple. Survival at any cost, even if it meant consuming entire civilizations. They were insectoid in appearance, with chitinous exoskeletons, multiple limbs, and compound eyes that seemed to absorb all light and hope. They communicated through harsh guttural clicks and hisses, translated by their merciless onboard systems. The Galactic Council, composed of species who had long since evolved beyond physical conflict, had no answer. Their defense fleets were primarily for policing trade routes and deterring rogue asteroid miners. Their peace treaties, once their greatest strength, were now their greatest vulnerability. They were sheep before wolves, and the Cathar were feasting. But what choice do we have, Kalor? Pleaded Minister Ilara, a delicate, avian-like being whose species valued artistic expression above all else. Their ships are primitive, but their sheer numbers, they overwhelm our patrol craft. Their weapons, they shatter our shields. Our people are not warriors. We are scholars, artists, engineers. The Cathar had shown no mercy. They had already razed 3 colony worlds that had dared to resist, leaving behind radioactive husks as grim warnings. The Council was paralyzed by fear, their ancient wisdom useless against such raw, unbridled aggression. There might be another option, a quiet voice interjected. It belonged to archivist Xylos, a frail, multi-limbed creature from the ancient Lyran civilization, keepers of the galactic historical records. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. All eyes turned to him. What option, Xylos? Councillor Kalor demanded, his frustration giving way to a flicker of hope. For centuries, Xylos began, his voice barely above a whisper. Our council has overseen the containment of a species deemed too dangerous, too volatile, too prone to conflict to be permitted full access to the galactic stage. Their history was a chronicle of relentless self-destruction, punctuated by bursts of terrifying ingenuity and unmatched ferocity. He activated a holographic display. The image that appeared was a pristine blue-green planet, teeming with life. Earth, and surrounding it, in geosynchronous orbit, were hundreds of massive, cylindrical structures each miles long, dark and silent against the vibrant backdrop. These are the cryovaults, Xylos explained, his voice gaining a slight tremor. Generations ago, following a period of unprecedented interstellar expansion and subsequent internal strife, the species we refer to as humans voluntarily entered into a state of suspended animation. Their entire population placed into cryo-sleep and their homeworld sealed off. The understanding was that they would remain dormant until such a time as they either evolved beyond their inherent belligerence or until the galaxy faced a threat so dire that only their unique capabilities could offer a solution. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. The humans, the forgotten menace, the species whose very existence had once sent shivers down the spines of galactic elders. They had been relegated to myth, a distant historical curiosity. Awaken them? Minister Elara gasped, her feathers ruffling in alarm. You speak of awakening a species that nearly annihilated itself with its own weapons? A species infamous for its wars and its military solutions? We have no military solutions, Minister, Councillor Kalor said, his voice flat. We have only surrender or extinction. If these humans are as formidable as the archives suggest, they might be our only chance. Ambassador Virtuk, his luminous form dimming, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Are they controllable? What if they simply replace the Cathar as our oppressors? Xylos looked at the silent, imposing cryo-vaults around Earth. Their protocol for awakening specified 2 conditions. Either self-initiated re-emergence when their internal monitors detected sufficient societal evolution, or an external activation by the Galactic Council in a time of extreme existential threat. The external activation also came with a caveat. Their initial reintegration sequence mandates a full briefing on the current galactic situation and, well, their designated leader, General Anya Sharma, also left very specific instructions on how they were to be approached. A ripple of unease spread through the Council. Specific instructions from a species notorious for its unpredictability. It sounded like a gamble of galactic proportions. But as the Cathar terror continued to mount, as their worlds fell one by one, the gamble began to look less like a risk and more like the only card left to play. Contact their central activation nexus, Councillor Kalor finally declared, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. Initiate the awakening protocols. We will bring them the current galactic situation, and we will adhere to General Sharma's instructions. We have exhausted all other options. The Cathar have brought us to this. Now, they will face the consequences. Far above Earth, in the silent, star-dusted void, the ancient cryo-vaults, dormant for nearly a millennium, began to pulse with a faint internal light. A subtle hum resonated through their vast structures, a dormant power stirring. Deep within, countless human bodies, frozen in time, began the long, slow, and bewildering journey back to consciousness. The Cathar had no idea what they had just unleashed. Part 2. The awakening was a slow, agonizing process. For the humans, it was a transition from a dreamless void to a world that was both familiar and profoundly alien. One moment, they were living in the mid-23rd century, their planet teetering on the brink of unprecedented technological advancement and societal change. The next, a millennium had passed, and the stars outside their cryo-vaults held a terrifying new threat. General Anya Sharma, Supreme Commander of the Terran Systems Defense Force, was one of the first to be fully reactivated. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, blinked open to a world of unfamiliar faces. Archivist Xylos, accompanied by a small diplomatic team from the Galactic Council, stood before her cryo chamber. There forms a cacophony of exotic biology. General Sharma, Xylos's voice resonated, translated by a device at his throat. Welcome back. We are the Galactic Council. We regret to inform you that your awakening has been necessitated by a galactic emergency. Sharma sat up, her movements stiff from centuries of inactivity. Her cryo chamber, part of a vast underground complex, hummed with the sounds of thousands of other chambers coming to life around her. A team of human medical personnel, also recently awakened, moved with quiet efficiency. A galactic emergency? Sharma repeated, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. She looked around, her gaze assessing every alien face, every piece of unfamiliar technology. My instructions were clear. We were only to be awakened if humanity faced an existential threat, or if the entire galaxy was on the brink of collapse. "It is the latter, General," Xylos confirmed, his tone grim. "A species known as the Cathar has terrorized the Council. They are relentless, violent, and utterly without mercy. Our defense fleets have been routed. Our worlds are falling. We are desperate." Xylos proceeded to deliver a condensed yet comprehensive briefing on the Cathar. He detailed their rapid expansion, their brutal tactics, their technological advantages in offensive weaponry, and the Council's utter inability to counter them. He showed holographic projections of ravaged colony worlds, of Cathar vessels orbiting terrified planets, demanding tribute. General Sharma listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, seemed to burn with an ancient, dangerous fire. When Xylos finished, the room was silent. Part 1, for 10,000 years, the Galactic Concordance had known an unbroken and, it must be said, somewhat self-satisfied peace. It was an age of enlightenment, a sprawling galactic community of over 300 advanced species who had long since traded the crude implements of war for the refined tools of diplomacy, science, and art. Their starships, elegant vessels of polished chrome and shimmering energy fields, were designed to chart nebulae and ferry diplomats, not to wage battles. Their societies, built on foundations of pure logic, shared consciousness or intricate artistic expression, viewed physical conflict as a distasteful and primitive relic, a subject for historical study alongside ritual sacrifice and the burning of fossil fuels. Their central governing body, the Grand Council, convened on the capital world of Ethel, a planet engineered to be a perfect paradise with continents of sculpted land masses, oceans of placid turquoise water, and cities of gleaming, crystalline spires that sang a soft harmonic note in the ever-present twilight. They were the pinnacle of civilization. They were sophisticated, wise, and utterly catastrophically unprepared for the arrival of the Vorlag. The Vorlag did not announce themselves with transmissions or ultimatums. They simply appeared, a tide of biological horrors pouring from the void between galaxies, a swarm of chitin and rage driven by a singular, terrifying imperative: consumption. They were not conquerors seeking territory or subjects. They were a plague, stripping worlds of every last shred of organic matter before moving on, leaving behind them a trail of sterile, silent rocks. Their ships were not machines, but living leviathans, vast, armored beasts with carapaces that could shrug off the polite inquiries of Concordance patrol cruiser lasers, and maws that spat gobs of corrosive, shield-eating plasma. Their warriors, insectoid nightmares that scuttled on multiple razor-sharp limbs, fought with a suicidal, mindless ferocity that shattered the Concordance's logical and ordered understanding of the universe. In the Grand Council chamber on Ethel, a place designed for calm debate and reasoned compromise, the prevailing atmosphere was one of raw, unadulterated panic. The vast holographic display at the center of the room, which usually showed fluctuating trade indices or stellar cartography projects, now depicted the relentless, cancerous spread of the Vorlag swarm across Concordance territory. The red icons representing devoured worlds were multiplying at an alarming rate. "Our shields are fundamentally ineffective against their bioplasma weaponry," reported Admiral Zorin of the Xylosian Avians, his magnificent feathered crest, usually a vibrant display of confidence, now drooping in utter defeat. His species were masters of energy manipulation, yet their most advanced shielding technologies simply dissolved before the Vorlag onslaught. Their fighter forms overwhelm our automated defense grids through sheer, unrelenting numbers. They do not respond to any of our hails on any frequency. They do not negotiate. They do not reason. They only consume. Across the chamber, Chancellor Valerius of the Silicates, a majestic being whose crystalline form usually pulsed with the calm, cool light of pure logic, now flickered with a frantic, anxious rhythm. "We have received a final fragmented report from the Cygnus sector. The entire sector is lost. Our mass evacuation efforts managed to save less than a tenth of the population across 7 inhabited worlds. We lack the military infrastructure, the strategic understanding, and frankly, the psychological fortitude to mount a meaningful resistance. Our ways are simply not their ways. We are trying to solve a complex equation, and they are simply eating the paper it is written on." The chamber fell into a heavy, Despairing silence, the hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the funereal gloom within. They had tried everything their civilized minds could conceive. They had broadcasted messages of peace, complex mathematical proofs of their intelligence, and beautiful works of art. The Vorlag had answered by consuming the transmission relays. They had dispatched their defense fleet, whose captains were trained in de-escalation and traffic control, and they had been annihilated in moments by a foe who did not understand the concept of surrender. It was into this abyss of hopelessness that a new voice emerged. It was a soft, rustling whisper, like dry leaves skittering across ancient stone, yet it cut through the panicked chatter like a blade of obsidian. It belonged to historian Lyra, a venerable, ancient being from a species that had long ago transitioned to a purely informational existence, serving as the living archives of the concordance. "There is one species," she whispered, her form a shimmering, indistinct column of light in the corner of the chamber. "One member of the concordance whom we have for centuries kept at a safe and deliberate distance. A species admitted under a probationary status so ancient that most have forgotten the reasons for it. We have classified their martial history as a hazardous text, so extensive, so profoundly and creatively violent, that we passed a unanimous resolution forbidding them from maintaining any significant military presence beyond the borders of their own star system." A low murmur rippled through the council members. They all knew, at least in an academic sense, of the species Lyra spoke. The odd, emotionally volatile bipeds from the small, high-gravity world in the backwater Sol system. The creatures who had clawed their way up from the mud, nearly wiping themselves out with sharpened rocks, then with gunpowder, then with atomic fire, before finally, somehow, reaching for the stars. The humans. Their historical archives, which I have studied as part of my duties, speak of concepts our modern language barely has words for, Lyra continued, her light pulsing with the gravity of her words. Total war, asymmetric warfare, wars of attrition, psychological operations, scorched earth policies. They do not just fight when necessary. They have, for millennia, turned the act of fighting into their most terrifying science and their most brutal art form. They have entire branches of their society dedicated to nothing but perfecting the act of killing. They have divisions of their military whose sole purpose is to engage in specialized, nightmarish forms of combat. Chancellor Valerius, his logical mind desperate for any variable that might change the equation, seized on the idea. The other members shifted uncomfortably, the name human conjuring vague, unpleasant images of chaos and unpredictability. Specialized divisions? Valerius pressed, his light sharpening with focus. Elites? Yes, perhaps that is the solution we have been missing. We do not need their full, chaotic armies, which would be politically unwise and potentially introduce a new predator into our delicate ecosystem, but a small surgical unit, their most skilled warriors. A demonstration of martial prowess to shock the Vorlag and rally our own forces. We must petition the humans. We must ask them to send us their special forces. The term, translated from the archaic and guttural sounds of a human language called English, felt potent, almost magical. The council members, in their desperation, began to form an image in their minds. They pictured a handful of legendary heroes, titans of the battlefield, clad in gleaming armor, wielding weapons of unimaginable power. They envisioned a single, sleek, impossibly advanced vessel appearing in their hour of need, carrying a dozen or so of humanity's finest specimens. It would be a silver bullet, a clean, logical solution to a messy, illogical problem. It would be a force small enough to be deployed, studied, and then politely thanked and sent home once the crisis was averted. The vote was nearly unanimous. The risk of inaction had finally outweighed the long-held fear of human belligerence. The formal request was encoded and transmitted across the galaxy to the Sol system. Humanity, which had been watching the Vorlag invasion with a grim, quiet concern from their isolated corner of the space, responded with an efficiency that was, in itself, slightly unnerving. Their designated ambassador, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see right through the diplomatic niceties, appeared before the council via a crisp, no-frills hologram. Her nameplate read, General Catherine O'Malley, Terran Unified Command. "Let me be clear," she stated, her voice devoid of the usual flowery greetings or diplomatic platitudes. It was the flat, direct, and weary tone of a commander who had seen too much. After centuries of being told our very nature was a threat to galactic peace, you are now asking for our help to fight a war. Chancellor Valerius felt a flicker of shame, but pushed it aside. "We are in a desperate situation, General. We are requesting the aid of your most elite warriors, your special forces. We require a surgical strike team to help us analyze and counter this unprecedented Vorlag threat." General O'Malley was silent for a long, uncomfortable moment. She stared out from the hologram, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the council members, lingering for a moment on the flickering light of Valerius, then the drooping feathers of Zoran. Her expression was utterly unreadable, a mask of hardened professionalism. But deep within her eyes, a strange, almost imperceptible flicker of something ancient and tired, something that might have been pity, or perhaps even a dark, weary amusement, came and went in an instant. "You want our special forces?" she repeated slowly. The words measured, as if she were confirming a particularly strange ammunition requisition. The Concordance's forward operating base, designated Starbase Epsilon, was a pristine example of their aesthetic and technological philosophy. A graceful ring-shaped station of gleaming white alloys and softly glowing energy conduits, it orbited a majestic, purple-ringed gas giant in the Vega system. It was a place of science, observation, and quiet efficiency, run by a skeleton crew and a sophisticated central AI. Now, it had been repurposed as the welcoming point for humanity's saviors, and the hangar bay had been prepared with all the ceremony the Concordance could muster. A Zelosian honor guard, their plumage immaculate, and their ceremonial energy staffs humming with a pleasant, harmless frequency, stood in perfect formation. Admiral Zoran and a delegation of military observers from a dozen different species stood ready, a formal speech of welcome translated and loaded onto Zoran's datapad. They watched the star-dusted void, expecting the arrival of a single, small, stealthy ship, a vessel befitting an elite surgical strike team. What they got instead was a violent, angry tear in the very fabric of space. Without any warning on their long-range sensors, a churning, unstable vortex of brilliant blue energy ripped itself into existence 1,000 kilometers from the station. It looked less like a method of travel and more like a wound in reality. From this chaotic portal, a ship emerged that was a profound insult to every principle of Concordance starship design. It was not elegant. It was not polished. It was a jagged, brutal wedge of dark gray armor, scarred and pitted, bristling with an obscene number of kinetic weapon emplacements, missile pods, communication arrays, and sensor blisters. Scorch marks from countless atmospheric re-entries marred its hull like the faded tattoos of a violent past. It had no glowing energy fields, no graceful curves. It was a tool, a weapon, and it radiated a silent, sullen menace. Its identification beacon, when it finally flickered on, read UNS Indomitable. Its classification was not stealth corvette or scout ship. It was troop carrier. Before Admiral Zoran could fully process the ship's terrifyingly utilitarian aesthetic, the violent portal remained open. A second ship, identical in its brutal design, emerged. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. For nearly an entire hour, a relentless, disciplined stream of these monstrous vessels poured out of the subspace rupture. They moved with a practiced, no-nonsense efficiency, arranging themselves into a grim, interlocking formation of overlapping fire zones that dwarfed the elegant starbase and made its patrol cruisers look like delicate toys. There were over 50 of them. The honor guard began to fidget nervously, their ceremonial staffs seeming particularly useless. Finally, a shuttle detached from the lead vessel, the Indomitable. It was as ugly and functional as its parent ship, a blocky, armored craft that descended toward the hangar bay with none of the grace of a Concordance lander. It simply came, its maneuvering thrusters firing in harsh, loud bursts. It docked with a solid, jarring thud that echoed through the deck plates. Admiral Zoran and his delegation stood waiting, their carefully prepared welcoming ceremony now feeling profoundly and deeply inadequate. The formal speech on his datapad suddenly seemed like a ridiculous piece of poetry. The shuttle ramp lowered not with a gentle hum, but with a loud, grinding hiss of hydraulics. The figures that emerged were not the 7-foot-tall, genetically engineered super soldiers the Council had secretly, and somewhat hopefully, imagined based on their historical fictions. They were simply people, men and women of a startling variety of heights, ages, and ethnic backgrounds. But they moved with a shared, predatory economy of motion, their eyes constantly, almost casually scanning the hangar, assessing angles, noting exits, their heads turning to track the movement of the honor guard. Their armor was not the gleaming heroic plate of legend. It was a dull, olive-drab composite, scuffed, scratched, and loaded with a dizzying array of pouches, wires, medical kits, and spare ammunition magazines. They carried compact, brutally functional projectile weapons held in a low, ready position that was simultaneously relaxed and imminently threatening. They looked tired. They looked bored. And they looked more dangerous than anything Admiral Zorin had ever seen in his life. A man who seemed to be carved from granite, with a face like a clenched fist and a pale scar that cut a path from his left eyebrow to his jawline, stepped forward. His uniform bore a series of simple chevrons and bars that denoted a rank the station's computer identified as Colonel. "Colonel John Riley," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the deck. He did not offer a diplomatic greeting or a statement of shared purpose. He scanned the assembled aliens and asked a simple question. "They call me Stalker. This the welcoming committee? Great. Where's the briefing room?" Admiral Zorin, a being accustomed to hours of formal greetings and diplomatic pleasantries before any substantive discussion, fluttered his wings in complete confusion. "Colonel Riley, welcome to Starbase Epsilon. We are honored. Are you all the Special Forces?" He gestured vaguely at the 20 or so soldiers who had disembarked and were now wordlessly, and rather unnervingly, setting up a security perimeter around the shuttle. Colonel Riley gave him a blank, uncomprehending look as if Zorin had just asked him to explain the color blue. "We're the 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. We're the advance party. We lead the way. Now the briefing room?" The briefing room was a state-of-the-art holographic theater designed to create immersive, three-dimensional representations of star systems and battlefields. Colonel Riley and his command staff, about 20 of his soldiers in total, filed in. They did not take the comfortable, ergonomic seats that shimmered into existence for them. They stood, lining the walls or leaning against the consoles, their helmets off, but their weapons never more than an arm's length away. Their impassive expressions were more unsettling than any display of aggression could have been. Admiral Zorin began the briefing, his voice trembling slightly as he gestured to the vast, swirling hologram of the Vorlag swarm. He detailed their biology as best they understood it, their swarm tactics, their bioplasma weaponry, and the Concordance's repeated catastrophic failures at engagement. The humans listened in a heavy, contemplative silence, their eyes fixed on the display, absorbing data with an intensity that was palpable. When Zorin finished his bleak report, a soldier in the back, a young woman with a sharp face and a cybernetic data interface jack just behind her ear, spoke up without being addressed. She was looking at a handheld data slate. "So, to summarize, zero centralized command and control structure, hive mind behavior with a probable Queen-class bioform at the center. Primary armament is a corrosive plasma expectorant with a tactically significant recharge rate, and their fighter forms are essentially just unguided flying mouths with teeth. Is that about the size of it?" Zorin stared at her, dumbfounded by the blunt, almost disrespectful summary of a threat that had brought his civilization to its knees. "Yes," he managed to stammer. "That is a crude but distressingly accurate assessment. Sounds like a regular Tuesday back on Titan," another soldier muttered from the corner, which earned a few quiet, humorless chuckles from his comrades. Colonel Riley stepped forward, into the center of the holographic map. He gestured for the display to zoom in on the nearest planet currently being consumed by the Vorlag, a once lush garden world designated Vega 4. "All right," he said, his tone shifting instantly from one of bored transit to one of absolute, unquestionable command. "No more talk. Here's the operational plan. The fleet, he gestured vaguely upwards, referring to the 50 menacing carriers now parked in orbit, will establish a hard cordon around this planet and provide orbital fire support. My battalion will perform a full-scale combat drop directly onto the planetary surface. He pointed at a continental landmass on the holographic globe. We'll establish a beachhead here, in this highland region, secure a landing zone for our heavy armor and logistical support, and then we will begin a systematic sweep and clear operation. We'll send your science teams plenty of dead samples for analysis, but frankly, I don't care what they're made of. I just need to know the fastest way to make more of them dead. Admiral Zorin was physically aghast. His feathers puffed out in alarm. A combat drop? You intend to drop your soldiers from orbit onto a world completely overrun by the enemy? But our estimates show billions of Vorlag organisms on that continent alone. Your battalion, there are only, what, 1,000 of you on that carrier? Riley turned his head slowly to look at the Admiral. For the first time, a flicker of a discernible emotion showed in his hard eyes. It was not anger or arrogance. It was a profound, weary pity. Admiral, he said slowly, his voice dropping, as if explaining a fundamental concept of reality to a very small, very fragile child. We're the advance party. The rest of the 7th Infantry Division is still transitioning through the gate. We're just the first wave. He paused, letting the words sink in. There are 20,000 of us coming. The silence that fell in the room was absolute, a vacuum of stunned comprehension. 20,000! The Council had asked for a surgical team of their finest elites, and the humans had sent an entire army division. The campaign on the blighted surface of Vega 4 evolved from a swift, shocking invasion into a methodical, brutal grind. For the human soldiers of the 75th Ranger Regiment, it was just another day at the office, albeit an office filled with screeching alien monsters and a landscape that looked like a nightmare. For the Concordance observers watching from the sterile safety of orbit, it was a continuous, horrifying, and deeply compelling education in the true nature of total war. The Rangers pushed outward from their fortified beachhead day after day, a slow, unstoppable tide of disciplined violence. Their advance was not a glorious charge, but a painstaking meter-by-meter process of extermination. They cleared vast subterranean Vorlag hives with gouts of jellied incendiary fuel from their flamethrowers, collapsed the enemy's burrowing tunnels with precisely placed seismic charges, and fought in the blood-soaked alien dirt with a grim, professional determination that never seemed to waver. The Vorlag, for their part, proved to be a terrifyingly adaptive and relentless foe. They were not intelligent in the way the Concordance understood, but they possessed a primal evolutionary cunning. They learned to counter the humans' devastating air support by burrowing deep and only emerging directly under their fortified positions in massive explosive ambushes. They began to ignore the larger, more heavily armored tanks, recognizing them as hardened targets, and instead swarmed the individual soldiers in overwhelming waves of chitin and claws. Their sheer, seemingly infinite numbers remained their greatest and most horrifying weapon, an endless ocean of ravenous life that crashed against the human. Defenses day and night, the climax of the planetary campaign came at what the human soldiers grimly nicknamed the Spire. It was the Vorlag's primary hive and undisputed command node for the entire continent, a colossal, mountain-sized organic structure of hardened resin and pulsating biomass that scraped the toxic clouds of Vega Phi's sky. It was a living fortress, a pulsating monument to alien horror, and deep within its core, the humans' long-range bioscanners had confirmed the presence of a single, massive life form, a brood queen. It was here that she laid her eggs, and it was from here that she directed the swarm through a subtle wash of pheromones and psionic signals. Colonel Riley's objective, stripped of all military jargon, was simple: destroy the Spire, kill the Queen, and break the swarm's coherence on the planet for good. The plan Riley devised was audacious, bordering on the insane. The main force of the battalion, supported by all available armor and air assets, would launch a massive, full-scale frontal assault on the Spire. It would be a diversion, a grand and bloody piece of theater designed to draw the attention of the entire Vorlag horde and fix the bulk of their warriors in place. While this maelstrom of destruction was underway, a single, reinforced platoon, 32 soldiers from the battalion's Charlie Company, would be inserted via a high-altitude, low-opening, or halo, parachute jump several miles away from the main battle. Their mission was to move unseen through the chaos, infiltrate the spire from a series of concealed volcanic vents at its rear, navigate the labyrinthine tunnels and plant a single, powerful tactical fusion charge directly at the base of the Queen's brood chamber. It was a mission with a casualty probability rate that the Concordance computers calculated at 98.7%. It was, for all intents and purposes, a suicide mission. On the orbital station, Admiral Zorin watched the holographic plot of the coming battle with a deep, sickening dread. 32 soldiers? He chirped, his voice tight with anxiety. He is sending just 32 of them against the very heart of the hive? Against the Queen herself? They will be detected, surrounded, and devoured before they get within a kilometer of the spire. The human liaison, Captain Rostova, who had been promoted to a more permanent advisory role, simply took a long, slow sip of the bitter black liquid humans called coffee. She seemed completely unconcerned. "They're Charlie Company, Admiral," she said, as if that explained everything. They drew the short straw. They'll get it done. The battle began with a thunderous, earth-shattering roar. The main assault force hit the Vorlag swarm like a tidal wave of steel and fire. Tanks roared, their cannons firing relentlessly. Gunships swooped from the sky, their rotary cannons screaming. And thousands of Rangers laid down a solid wall of lead, their rifles barking in a continuous, deafening chorus of controlled violence. The Vorlag swarm, billion strong, crashed against this wall in a mindless, furious wave of shrieking bodies and snapping claws. The battlefield became a churning, hellish landscape of explosions, plasma, and death. Miles away from this apocalyptic scene, the 32 soldiers of Charlie Company landed as silently as ghosts in the dead of night. They were led by a quiet, calculating first lieutenant named David Chen, a man known for his preternatural calm under pressure. They moved through the twisted, alien landscape with a speed and stealth that was mesmerizing to watch on the satellite feed, their advanced camouflage systems rendering them all but invisible. They reached the rear of the spire and found the concealed entrance, a series of active volcanic vents that periodically belched plumes of superheated toxic steam. The heat was intense enough to melt the seals on a Concordance environmental suit, the air thick with alien spores and the stench of decay. But the Rangers pushed on, descending deep into the warm, dark, pulsating heart of the enemy's lair. They were discovered 2 miles in. A previously unknown variant of Vorlag warrior, a smaller, faster bioform with advanced sensory organs, stumbled upon their trail. An alarm, a high-pitched psionic shriek, echoed through the hive, and all hell broke loose. The narrow, organic tunnels erupted in a chaotic, close-quarters crossfire of corrosive plasma and human bullets. The platoon was instantly cut off from their exit, surrounded by tens of thousands of enraged aliens. Deep in enemy territory with a live and very powerful fusion bomb. "This is it," Chancellor Valerius said from Ethel, his voice heavy with a logical, calculated finality. "They are lost." A noble, but ultimately futile effort. On the command comms channel, which was being broadcast to the orbital station, Lieutenant Chen's voice was impossibly calm, his breathing even despite the cacophony of battle raging around him. "Stalker, this is Charlie 6. We've encountered heavy resistance and are cut off. The route to the primary target in the brood chamber is blocked. We're taking casualties." Colonel Riley's voice came back instantly, like a chip of stone. "What's your status and recommendation, 6? "My recommendation is a change of plans," Chen replied, the sound of his rifle firing punctuating his words. "We're setting the charge right here. We found a major geothermal plasma conduit that seems to feed the entire upper structure. Detonating the fusion charge here should be enough to cook the Queen and destabilize the whole spire. But there's no way we're getting out. The swarm density is too high. The timer on the charge is set for 5 minutes. I suggest you pull the main force back to a safe distance. Tell my boys. Tell them it was an honor." The line went silent, except for the sounds of the desperate losing firefight. A profound, horrified hush fell over the Concordance observers. A sacrifice. The entire platoon was choosing to give their lives to complete the mission. They were choosing death over failure. This level of selfless devotion was unheard of, an illogical, insane variable in the equation of survival. But then, Colonel Riley's voice cut through the silence again, and it was not filled with grief or acceptance. It was filled with a cold, terrifying fury. Negative, Charlie 6, you are not authorized to die on my battlefield today. Sit tight and expend ammunition. I'm sending you a little present. Before anyone could ask what he meant, a new icon appeared on the holographic map. It was a single blue dot, representing a lone soldier, which had broken off from the main battle line and was now moving at an impossible speed directly toward Charlie Company's besieged position. "What is that?" Admiral Zorin asked, his voice a bewildered squawk. "A high-speed drone. A small attack vehicle?" Captain Rostova leaned forward, a look of grim, almost feral admiration on her face. "That," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is Sergeant Marcus Cole. The men in 1st Battalion call him the Janitor. He's our senior combat medic." They watched on the tactical display as the single blue icon, representing one man, moved through a solid sea of red enemy indicators. Explosions blossomed in his wake. The command channel, which had focused on Charlie Company, now crackled with the sounds of Cole's heavy machine gun, a terrifyingly steady rhythm of death, and the panicked, high-pitched shrieks of the forelag. He was not avoiding the enemy. He was carving a straight, bloody path directly through them. Sergeant Cole reached the trapped platoon's position in 4.5 minutes. The comms feed from Lieutenant Chen's helmet camera, which had been showing a desperate last stand against a wall of claws and teeth, suddenly showed that wall being blown apart from the outside. A huge figure in heavily scarred and customized armor burst through, his heavy weapon glowing red-hot from sustained fire. He was carrying a massive medical pack on his back and was dragging a heavy case of ammunition behind him with one hand. The hard-won victory on Vega 4 was the fulcrum upon which the entire war against the Vorlog turned. It was more than just a single planetary liberation. It was a profound psychological blow to the swarm and an even more profound philosophical awakening for the Galactic Concordance. Armed with the detailed biological and tactical intelligence the Rangers had literally bled for, and emboldened by the sheer fact that the Vorlag could be beaten, the various species of the Concordance, under human guidance, began to mount a coordinated and effective resistance. The tide began to turn. But the real, lasting change was not taking place on the battlefields across the ravaged sectors. It was taking place in the quiet, gleaming halls of the Grand Council on Ethel, where the awe the leaders felt for the human soldiers was now matched, and perhaps even surpassed by a deep, unsettling, and existential fear. After the Vega campaign was concluded and the planet was undergoing the long, arduous process of sterilization, Chancellor Valerius formally requested a private meeting with General O'Malley. He did not want a military debriefing or a strategic planning session. He needed to understand the force his people had unleashed. He needed to understand humanity. "General," Valerius began, his crystalline form pulsing with a slow, contemplative light. They were meeting via hologram, the general in her stark, functional office, the chancellor in his ornate chamber. "We, the entire Concordance, owe your people a debt of gratitude we can likely never repay. Your soldiers have achieved what we thought was impossible. But we must know. We have witnessed your Rangers. We have studied the logs of their campaign. We have seen their incredible courage, their chilling discipline, their terrifying effectiveness. We have seen a single medic, Sergeant Marcus Cole, perform feats that our historians are already comparing to the heroes of ancient mythology. And yet we are repeatedly, almost casually told that these are not your special forces. We no longer ask this question out of tactical curiosity, General. We ask it out of a fundamental need to comprehend your very nature as a species. What are your special forces? What could a human possibly do that is more special than what we have already witnessed?" General O'Malley looked at the alien leader for a long, quiet moment. The faint, unreadable smile he had seen during their very first conversation returned, but this time it was less amused and more sad. She leaned back in her simple, ergonomic chair, a gesture of weary patience. "Chancellor," she said, her voice softer and more pedagogical than he had ever heard it. "With all due respect, you are asking the wrong question. You have been asking the wrong question from the very beginning. You are trying to understand our military, our entire martial philosophy, by applying your own cultural framework. Your civilizations, for the most part, are built on the principle of specialization. You have your thinkers, your artists, your engineers, so you see power as a pyramid, with a few exceptionally talented, genetically or intellectually gifted individuals at the very top. It is logical, then, for you to assume that our special forces represent the absolute peak of that pyramid. Is that not the correct model?" Valerius asked, his light flickering with genuine curiosity. "No," O'Malley replied firmly. "It is not. Humanity's strength, our military strength, is not a pyramid. It is a foundation. A very, very high and very, very broad foundation. What you saw on Vega 4, Chancellor, was not an exception to the rule. It was the baseline. That is the standard of performance, courage, and initiative we expect from every single soldier who puts on our uniform." She brought up a holographic file on her desk, projecting a simplified version for Valerius to see. It showed the grueling, multi-year training regimen for a standard human infantryman. It detailed months of brutal physical conditioning in high-gravity simulators to prepare them for any planetary environment. It showed psychological stress testing that bordered on torture, designed to make them completely unflappable in the face of unimaginable horror. It detailed advanced weapons training on dozens of systems, tactical simulations against impossibly clever AI opponents, and extensive survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. And most surprisingly to Valerius, it detailed a comprehensive combat medical training program that every single soldier, not just medics, was required to master. The average concordant citizen, Valerius's logical mind calculated, would not survive the first week of the physical conditioning alone. "Every one of our soldiers is a multi-role combatant," O'Malley explained, gesturing to the file. "Every one of them is a rifleman, a medic, a communications technician, and a basic strategist. We do not train them simply to follow orders without question. That is how you build an army of drones. We train them to understand the intent behind the order. We give them the objective, and we trust them to be creative, adaptive, and absolutely ruthless in achieving it. That initiative you saw, that ability for a squad to act independently, for a soldier to take a calculated risk, that is not a rare trait. It is a core requirement." She leaned forward slightly. "Sergeant Cole is an exceptional and highly decorated medic. But every platoon in our military has a medic just as dedicated and almost as skilled. Lieutenant Chen is a brilliant young officer, but every company is led by officers who are just as capable and just as willing to make the hard choices. What you see as legendary mythical heroism, Chancellor, we see as meeting expectations. Our entire military philosophy, forged over thousands of years of fighting the most cunning, cruel, and unpredictable enemy we have ever known, ourselves, is built on raising the standard of the regular soldier to a level that other species mistake for elite." Valerius felt a profound, conceptual chill run through his silicate structure. It was the feeling of a fundamental assumption being shattered. "Then the very term special forces, it is a deception? A psychological tool?" "Not a deception," O'Malley corrected gently. "It's a specialization of purpose, not of quality. Think of it this way. Our regular army, the Rangers you met on Vega, they are the sledgehammer. They are designed and trained to shatter a wall, to take ground, to fight and win a conventional high-intensity war. They are masters of direct, overwhelming force. Our special forces, they are the scalpel. They don't shatter the wall. They find a way to walk through it without anyone ever knowing the wall was even there. They engage in missions that a regular army by its very nature cannot. Deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines for months at a time. Counterterrorism and hostage rescue. Unconventional warfare, training and leading indigenous forces. They are not necessarily better or tougher soldiers than the Rangers. Their skill set is simply different, quieter, and applied to very different, very specific problems. A scalpel is a useless tool when you need to break down a fortress, and a sledgehammer is useless when you need to perform brain surgery." She leaned forward one last time, her gaze locking with his across the light years. You were terrified by our regular soldiers because you assumed they were the absolute peak of our capabilities. The truth you need to understand is this. The terrifying part about humanity is not the quality of our designated elites. It's the terrifyingly high quality of our average. It's the fact that every single human, from a soldier to a farmer to a teacher, when pushed, when their home or their comrades or their ideals are threatened, has the deep, ancestral capacity for the kind of ferocity, ingenuity, and self-sacrifice you witnessed on Vega 4. That is our true strength. Every one of our soldiers is a special force of nature, Chancellor. The ones we formally label special forces are just the ones who have perfected it into a quiet and deadly art. A new era dawned for the Galactic Concordance. An era of peace, but not the passive, fragile peace of the past. It was a vigilant, prepared, and far more humble peace. The human military remained in concordant space as advisors and trainers, helping the various species build a unified and effective defense force. The human soldiers, the Rangers, became reluctant celebrities. Their quiet professionalism and down-to-earth demeanor a constant source of fascination for the more flamboyant species of the Council. The story of the Rangers on Vega 4, and especially the tale of Sergeant the Janitor Cole, became a mandatory study in every new Concordance military academy. They studied the Battle of the Spire not just as a tactical victory, but as a profound lesson in philosophy. They learned that the true strength of a people was not found in a few chosen champions or mythic heroes, but in the unwavering resolve and the terrifyingly high standard of its common soldier. The Council never asked to see humanity's special forces again. They understood now. They didn't need to. They had seen more than enough in the tired, gritty, and utterly indomitable eyes of the regular soldiers who had terrified them, saved them, and taught them the true, frightening meaning of the human spirit.